Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Candid Catholic Convos. This year marks 14 years that my husband and I have been married. And even with all that distance between the time we got engaged 15 years ago and now, I can still remember very clearly what a recently divorced coworker of mine said to me instead of, "Congratulations on your engagement." She said something to the effect of, "Why would you want to tie yourself to someone if you're just going to change in 10 years? I also heard a lot of, "Why are you even bothering to get married? You don't need a piece of paper to prove that you love someone." And you know what? You're right. We didn't need a piece of paper to prove that we love each other, and we have absolutely changed over the last 14 years. You know why? Because marriage isn't a contract. A contract is an agreement for the exchange of goods or services based off of a condition. For example, if I hire someone to paint my house, I agree to pay them to paint my house. But if they don't paint my house, I don't have to pay them, and the contract is void. Marriage, however, is a covenant. It's not an exchange of goods or services with conditions attached. We become one. My husband became mine, and I became his. We belong to each other, and we're willing to risk the rest of our lives to love each other for all of it. And it took me a really long time to realize and accept that being Catholic isn't something I have to do. It's something I get to do. I get to experience God's grace. I get to experience everything He promised and the work that He does in and through me with my total abandonment to Him through the sacraments. I get to show the world a visible sign of an invisible reality by willing the good of another in my marriage, while others do it by entering the priesthood or religious life. So let's talk more about these sacraments, these covenants dedicated to serving others. Deacon Scott Root, senior theology teacher at Trinity High School, joins me again today for our Back to Basics series. And today we're exploring the last two sacraments, the sacraments of service, which are marriage and holy orders, and how they fit into our journey as Catholics. Deacon Root, welcome back. I feel like we just saw you.
I know. It's great. It's great to be here. I really am enjoying our conversations.
I am too. Today we're going to tackle the last two sacraments, and they're not, they're last, but certainly not least. And they are the sacraments of service. So talk to me a little bit about what the sacraments of service are and why they're important to us as Catholics.
So the sacraments of service are holy orders and the sacrament of marriage, holy orders being ordination to the diaconate, priesthood, and the episcopate, or the bishops. And these sacraments are important to us because they, in holy orders, the Church provides for our sacramental needs because of the sacrament of holy orders. So the bishops, as the successors to the apostles, ordain other men to be priests and deacons to aid him in providing for the sacramental needs of his flock. And then the sacrament of marriage is a sacrament of service because it strengthens us to have another person in our lives. And so we provide the service of providing the families that are involved in the church. But then also, in a very unique way, the laity takes the church into the secular world. Because when, priests and bishops especially, but even deacons, we wear our collars and stuff, there's a difference in the way we're seen and how we interact with the world. But the married couple or even the lay faithful who are single go out into the world, go into their jobs, go into their workplace, and live their Catholic faith as service to the world and in ways that the world doesn't even recognize or notice.
Yeah, I've heard the term the domestic church for families because it does, yes, we go to a physical church, but it's also at home as well in how we live and how we express the faith.
Right, and the parents become the first teachers of the child, and something important to their baptism. It's one of the things that they speak about in pledge to do in their when they have their child baptized. So, the domestic church is extremely important. It's where people learn how to pray, how to live the sacramental life, the importance of getting up in the Sunday morning and actually going to church, those kind of things. So, as one of the roles of those who are in holy orders is to support the domestic church, so that the domestic church can support us. It's a mutually beneficial service to each other. So we all play an important role in the church, and those roles benefit each other greatly in bringing the sacramental life to the people, and then the people bringing God's love and message out into the world.
It's teamwork.
It's teamwork.
Teamwork makes the dream work. I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about holy orders. I understand that there are 3 degrees of holy order: the episcopate, the presbyterate, and the diaconate. Can you talk to me a little bit about what each of those are?
Yes. So I guess we'll go in the order of ordination. So we'll start with the diaconate. The diaconate has its roots in Acts of the Apostles. As the church started to grow after Pentecost, the apostles found that it was very difficult for them to meet the spiritual needs of the people and also the material needs of the people. And so they casted lots and selected 7 men, including Stephen, and ordained them to be deacons to serve in charity. So we are, as deacons, configured to Christ the servant, and meet the needs of the church in that sense of charity, and also at the word and the altar. And so there are certain roles that the deacon performs at Mass, reading the gospel. He can give the homily if the pastor or the bishop allows. But our real function is to really get out there and to be with the people, and to bring that to the world. In the diaconate, we have what people term as transitional deacons and permanent deacons. Now, the argument can be made that once a deacon, always a deacon. So priests and bishops are also deacons. They've just moved to another level of the holy orders. But in the role of the permanent deacon, if a man is married before he is called to the diaconate and called to holy orders, he stays married. And so permanent deacons uniquely take the word of God out into the world by living the life of, similar to many of the laity, going out into the workplace and living that life, but also minister at the altar, etc. The priesthood is, the priests are ordained by the bishops, and their function is, they are alter Christus. They're configured to Christ to offer praise and worship and sacrifice. And so the priest, in his ministry, meets the sacramental needs of the people. That also means that they have to do things like be pastors and administer the parish, etc. But their primary function is to aid the bishop in bringing the sacraments to the flock. And then the bishop, the episcopacy, a priest is ordained to be a bishop, and then the bishop's job is to be the successor of the apostles within his own diocese. And so he does everything that the deacon and the priest does on the diocesan level, and relies heavily on his priests and deacons to help him to take care of the people in the parishes. He administers the diocese, but he is the chief person to administer the sacraments in his diocese, and there are certain sacraments that only a bishop can administer. So, for instance, a bishop is the ordinary minister of confirmation. He can give the faculties to his priests to do that, and like in instances like COVID, the bishop gave the priest the ability to administer that sacrament for an extended period of time, because of some of the issues with COVID and trying to get everybody confirmed that needed to be confirmed. Traditionally, the bishop gives the priest the opportunity to administer that sacrament from during the Easter Vigil to Pentecost in the Easter season, and then there are other times if like the bishop was sick or something, he could delegate a priest to do that. For holy orders, the bishop is the only one who can confer holy orders, and if there is no bishop, there is no conferral of holy orders. So if a diocese is without a bishop, they can bring another bishop in to confer the holy orders if that's the case. But only a bishop can confer holy orders upon another man as far as becoming a deacon or a priest.
Now, are like cardinals and higher up, obviously the Pope is the Pope, but between bishop and Pope, are those also considered part of the episcopacy?
They are. So cardinals are bishops with a special title because of their work in the church. It recognizes them, and they are given some special privileges. They're kind of considered like the ambassadors of the Pope. They might be given pastorship of a titular church in Rome, and their major function is to elect the new pope when the pope resigns, in the case of Pope Benedict, or passes, and that's their major role. The pope is the pope because he is the bishop of Rome. So as bishop of Rome, he becomes the pope because the universality of the church is found in Rome. So the fact of being Pope and Bishop of Rome are intertwined with one another. Interesting.
So it's kind of like, again, not to sound reductionist, but like bishop is kind of like the end all be all. It's just the like levels of bishop after that.
Right. There honors and some ways in which they work. Cardinals usually tend to work in the more universal church, while bishops may tend to focus on more just their particular diocese.
Got it. But they're all extensions of Christ.
They are extensions of Christ, yes.
I like that. So let's talk about marriage now. How is that considered a sacrament of service?
Marriage is a sacrament of service because it gives us the domestic church, and it takes the sacraments into the world. Married people interact with the world on a daily basis, whether it be in their jobs or their different parts of the community that they hang out with, or different clubs they participate in, their kids' sporting events, etc. And so it serves the church in taking the sacraments out into the world, and it also serves the church by providing for the families and the membership of the church, so that we have people coming to the church to experience God's love in the worship of God and in receiving the sacraments.
That's awesome. I've also heard that it's kind of like it's one of the only sacraments that we can give to each other, like lay people, as husband and wife. It's a sacrament that we administer to each other because that's as close to God as we can get, other than by receiving Him in the Eucharist.
Right. Yeah. So, in all the other sacraments, it's an ordained minister who is the one who confers the sacrament. The bishop can only do holy orders, as I said earlier, and he is the ordinary presider at confirmation. And then all the other sacraments can be done by a priest. And a deacon can confer the sacrament of baptism. But marriage, the priest, the bishop, the deacon, whoever's the clergy there, is the officiant, is the presider of the liturgy, and is a witness for the church that this is happening. But you're right, the bride and the groom confer the sacrament onto each other. It's a recognition of the two becoming one, as in Genesis, is stated in Genesis. And so the husband confers the sacrament upon his wife, and his wife confers the sacrament upon him, uniquely by the expression of the vows in front of the congregation, in front of the church community, and then uniquely again when those vows are consummated physically in the marital act.
That's so important to remember, too, because, I think I've been married for 14 years, but like we had talked about in the last episode, that love is a choice and is a verb. And when we make that choice and remember that this is something very special that we're involved in, it makes the everyday seem a little less mundane.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it can get pretty bogged down sometimes.
Right. Well, and marriage, two human beings living together and trying to juggle everything that we're juggling as far as finance and kids and everything else. We need God's grace to do that well. And so that loving bond that is created by the bride and the groom ministering that sacrament to each other and really becoming a mirror image of the Trinity, because God is part of that equation as well. God is in that sacrament. So, the desire of the husband for his wife is in part his desire for God, and her desire for him is in part a part of her desire for God. And them opening their desire for God to God and allowing God to fill them creates this Trinitarian effect in marriage that is unique. And so the marriage is called to be an image of the Trinity here on earth, a little foretaste of the heaven to come.
That's interesting, and it's a really great, again, it's that Trinitarian image to kind of help us really focus where our attention should be. I think that's so important. I want to focus on something interesting because, many of us don't receive all 7 sacraments. But as a permanent deacon, that means that you have potentially received all 7 sacraments. Is that a reach, or is that something that is that true? I guess
it is. It is true. It is true. As a deacon, I have received all 7 sacraments, and it is a unique place to be. If a man is called to the priesthood, for the most part, there are exceptions to the rule. There are some married priests, and we've had a couple in our own diocese. But for the most part, the rule is if you're going to become a priest, you're going to enter into the life of celibacy. And so priests usually are not married. To become a priest or deacon or to be married in the church, you would have to be baptized and receive those other sacraments. For a deacon to receive all 7 or have the ability to receive all 7 sacraments, he would have to be married before being called to the diaconate. If a man feels the call to the permanent diaconate and is unmarried, he will pledge to live the celibate life, uniquely from his other brother deacons who might be married. And I, as a deacon, if my wife were to die first, I pledge that I would remain celibate afterwards. I would not remarry. Interestingly, the last sacrament that I received was not ordination to the diaconate, but it was actually anointing the sick. I had an issue where I needed surgery, and I received that anointing, and I've actually had that done twice in the 4.5 years that I've been a deacon. So, ironically, it wasn't ordination, which you would think would have been the last one, but.
Yeah, well, we talked about last time that you don't have to be dying to
Right.
receive the anointing of the sick. I think that is so important. And I just want to touch on something briefly that you mentioned about how there are certain special instances where there are some priests who are married. What would constitute as a special instance?
Oftentimes, what that special instance is that the man and his family have decided to convert to Catholicism from another closely related Protestant denomination. And in that previous congregation, he might have worked in ministry as a pastor. And so he requests permission to become a priest since he is bringing experience of leading a congregation of worship in a congregation or in a faith background that is very similar to Catholicism. If the bishop accepts that, then what happens is that he goes through additional training to help him to understand the Catholic side of worship and the ways that our church would be different than what he is coming from, especially the understanding of Eucharist, which would be a major difference. And then once he fulfills the required education that was necessary, the bishop would ordain him. And I believe that somewhere in that process there's actually some contact with the Holy See in Rome as well for this to be allowed, since it's such an exception to the normal rule of how things are done.
That's fascinating. That was something that I didn't even know was a thing.
Another way that a man could receive priesthood and have been married to receive all 7 sacraments would be for the man to have been married and his wife passes and he's still able to serve the church as a priest. Like age or illness is not preventing that. And if he has any children, they're of an age where they take care of themselves. A man like that can petition bishop to be considered for ordination, and through the process of prayer and study and application, it can be determined that he is a viable candidate to become a priest and then be ordained later in life after his wife has passed too. So there is another way that's possible.
I think that's fascinating because I had interviewed Father Weaver once, and we were talking about vocations, and he was talking about how he had wrestled with the idea of never being a biological father, mm-hmm. but God had come to him and said, "But you're going to be a father of so many more." So there's such a, you're not necessarily giving something up. Like there's always a plan that God has, where you're either going to get this thing or you're going to get this thing or you're going to get something even better, which I think is always good to remember. Right.
And the important point of that is if we are open to God's plan, he will bless us more than we can ever expect. So it's about our intentional being open.
I'm sensing a theme with these episodes here.
But in all honesty, especially when we're looking at vocation, whether it be marriage or priesthood, or, holy orders, diaconate, episcopate, or consecrated religious life, or consecrated life as a consecrated virgin, whatever that is, it requires us to really discern, to make an intentional decision to discern what God's calling us to do. So many people in our world today, they just kind of go from one thing to the next, one job to the next, and they're never happy. And I think part of that is because they don't let God into the picture to help them to discern. He's the one that gave you your gifts and talents. He knows which gifts and talents you have in abundance, and he knows how to use those gifts and talents for the greater community, for the world in general. So why wouldn't we include him in that conversation to help us to discern where he needs us to be? Because if we open ourselves to that conversation, God will bless us abundantly.
Exactly. And speaking of discernment, marriage, the vocation of marriage and the vocation of holy orders, they're both vocations and they're sacraments as well, are huge. They're huge and they require a lot of discernment. So what would your advice be to somebody who's discerning either or if they know that they're called to one vocation or the other and they just need that extra
push? Yes.
Well,
open themselves up to the discernment process first by praying. Dear Lord, where are you calling me to be? What do you want for me in my life? What direction do you want my life to take? And then after that, investigate. If you have the opportunity to visit us, if you're considering priesthood, to visit a seminary and see what that life is, or to talk to your parish priest about, his vocation story, what that may be like. Talk to the vocations director. You mentioned Father Weaver. And they can aid you in that discernment process. If you're discerning in general, do that stuff, and then also discern marriage. Like, don't just date to date and not be alone. Date with the purpose of a knowledge of, God, is this what you want for me? Is this where you're calling me to be? So for marriage, you have to discern, first of all, is that the vocation that you're calling me to? But then, who am I supposed to live this vocation with? And so we have to be intentional when we look at the prospect of the kind of person we are and the kind of person that God has put into the world to complete us in many ways. So it's a lot of prayer, a lot of openness. Getting out there and experiencing all that God has to offer us. Dating in a very positive light, maybe with large groups of people in the beginning, and as things get more and more serious, to remember that we're discerning God's plan and asking Him to keep entering into that, so that it can keep us from lustful and sinful attitudes during that process. And if we just keep God as the center of that discernment, He will bless us abundantly, and we'll be happy. We'll be happy. We'll feel joy in our vocation.
I love that. He's always going to give us what we need, and we just have to trust that. I think as human beings, we want so desperately to control the outcome, and God's like, I got this. Just let me handle it.
Right, because we live in our human nature, and we live with other human beings. And what happens when we trust other human beings? Sometimes, more times than we'd like to count, our trust gets violated in some way, or we get hurt in some way. And so the negative connotation of living through a human experience where we trusted and we were hurt makes it harder to trust God, who we don't see in the same physical way. But in those moments, that's exactly when we need to trust God more, because He's going to be there. He's not going to hurt us. He's going to only give us what is best for us.
And just like with the other sacraments, this is a gift to say that He's still walking with us, even when we can't see the other set of footprints.
Right.
He's still walking with us. I love that. Deacon Root, this wraps up our sacramental series on Back to Basics. So thank you so much for opening our eyes and reminding us that these are, in fact, gifts that are available to us as Catholics. So thank you so much.
I'm so glad I could be here. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.